Welcome back to my channel, and for any of you who are new, welcome as well. And it has been a long time since I've posted on YouTube, and there were a few reasons for it. So basically I really felt that I was sort of trying to figure out where I wanted to go with my YouTube channel, and I always knew that I wanted to split it between fashion and positivity, but I feel like over the last few months I've gotten clearer about, you know, what it is that I want to create on here. I hope, or at least I've made the decision, at least I've committed to doing what feels right for me and to just creating things that feel right rather than trying to figure out, you know, what I should create. So I'm really going to try to start creating what feels right for me and just having just general discussions and talking about things that feel like they relate to my personal experience. So today's topic is going to be about the sort of clothing that we buy. Should we buy cheap? Should we buy expensive? And it's sort of looking at, you know, fast fashion, high-end fashion, luxury fashion, and everything in between. I feel like we often come across this dilemma of, we know that fast fashion is not a good idea, we know that it's bad for the environment, but we also know that it's the cheapest option. And so if you're not going to go for fast fashion, what do you do? And that's why I wanted to create this video. Really quickly, if you're not subscribed, then please hit the subscribe button down below and also hit the bell, and you will be notified every time I post a new video. So the first thing I really wanted to talk about is my own personal experience, especially recently. So basically recently I decided that I needed winter clothing for winter. That I needed winter clothing, I needed knitwear. And I found that this was more complicated, much more complicated than I thought that it was going to be. Here's why. The most available clothing, I feel, is fast fashion. So I wouldn't necessarily go as far as to say that all high street brands are fast fashion. There's no way that I would want to throw everything into, you know, one bucket like that. But I would say that quite a few, especially after looking it up, quite a few of the high street stores, high street shops that we see are fast fashion, and that makes it quite difficult because it means that the shops that we know of, the shops that feel familiar, the shops that we will generally see as we walk down the street, if you're trying to avoid fast fashion, then those are a lot of the shops that you're trying to avoid. And so if you're not buying from the shops that you see walking down the street, then where are you buying from? Where do you buy? And I found that knitwear was especially complicated because with knitwear, the aim for me was that I wanted clothing that was warm. That was the most important element when I went to buy this, is that I really wanted clothing that was going to be warm. So I looked up various stores. Now, the first jumper that I bought, and I will get back to that in a minute, the first jumper that I bought, I knew I was going to buy, I knew I really wanted it, but I also wanted more than just one jumper, because if any of you who've been watching my content on TikTok, you will see that I've basically worn the same black jumper with the gold studs. I wore that, I think, in so many videos, and I was literally just wearing it every day. So I decided that I wanted another sweater. And this was where it got complicated. So I looked up stores that I thought, you know, would be a possibility, that I saw as, you know, a bit more expensive, that I saw as, you know, not being fast fashion, not quite so much. So, but a lot of the items that I looked at were about maybe, I don't know, 170, probably more like 200, 300 pounds. Now at this particular point, that was more than I wanted to spend on one sweater. But a lot of the other options were fast fashion, so I was like, what do I do? And you know what? I still haven't particularly fixed it. I've ordered a few new items of clothing, but I still haven't really, I still don't think I've ordered another jumper. I still don't think I've actually solved this issue. The next thing I want to talk about is fast fashion not being black and white. Why is this important? I think firstly it's important because it's really important not to judge people, and I think you see this so much, and I think you see it a lot on social media. I know that I've seen it as well. You see so many people saying, oh, well, that's fast fashion, or you shouldn't be buying that. And I really think that this needs to be a conversation. I think this needs to be a discussion, an open-minded discussion, and a positive one. I think this needs to be a positive discussion, because otherwise you just end up in a situation where all you're really doing is pointing the finger and pointing blame. And personally, I don't think that's going to get us anywhere. I think we need to be honest about the fact that the solution isn't necessarily obvious and it's not always easy. So I'll give you some examples of what I mean when I say not black and white, and I think it really does affect various things. So one of the things for me is, and I know I was probably really naive about this, I didn't see Zara as fast fashion, and I recognised that I was wrong. I recognised that I was actually incorrect about that. But the reason I didn't realise it was because I actually saw Zara as being more expensive, and so Okay, I feel like we're darting here. So one of the things about fast fashion is the reason it's called fast fashion is because of how fast the collections are created and turned over. So previously we would have only had maybe 2 to 4 collections a year for most brands, and now at the point we're at in society at the moment where we want everything to be new, and everything turns over much more quickly. So instead it's more like 52 seasons quite often with a lot of fast fashion brands instead of 4. And obviously there are so many different issues that come along with fast fashion, but for the sake of this particular video I'll talk about the way that we consume. So one of the issues with fast fashion is how fast we consume it. So if a brand is creating products that they're selling very cheaply, and they're creating so many collections, then we see things, we get FOMO, we see that it's on sale, we think, oh, I can buy this really cheaply. And you know what? We actually feel good. That's another one of the issues. Like, we feel good when we get something for cheap because we feel like we've gotten a bargain, and we also feel like we've done something good because we feel like we've not spent more money on ourselves, and we actually feel like we've done a good thing. So we end up buying all of these various things, and they pile up, and a lot of it ends up being discarded. So when I shop, I always try to buy things that I think I'm going to keep, that I think are going to be long lasting, which is where I got confused with Zara, because I saw Zara as being more expensive, and I saw that as I felt that if I was going to buy from Zara, that I had to make more sort of thoughtful purchases because I knew I was spending that little bit more. And so another one of the issues is that now that I've realised that Zara is fast fashion as much as it is, that I now try not to buy from Zara. Now I would still, honestly, I would probably still buy trousers, and again this goes back to the not black and white. I find that I am much more comfortable in high-waisted trousers. Zara is the main place that I know that pretty much always seems to have really high-waisted, really comfortable trousers. So I would probably, honestly, I would probably still buy trousers from them now. I'm actually wearing a pair of Zara trousers right now, this very minute. But I do try not to look at, certainly in the last few months, I've tried not to look at the rest of their clothing. But the only thing about that is it gives me one less place to shop from, one less place that I can actually, where I can actually look up, if I'm looking for something, that's one less place that I can actually go to. Another example of something that's not very black and white for me personally is the jumper that I've been wearing a lot on TikTok, the black jumper with the gold spikes, which I absolutely love, and I'm wearing it constantly, and I'm gonna get so much wear out of it, and it's going to be really loved. But that was bought from Karen Millen, and and this is another thing that's complicated. Karen Millen was definitely originally not considered fast fashion at all. It was, I think it was even taken off the high street. So I would say it's now not even, it probably isn't even considered a high street store now, because I don't think it actually is on the high street any longer. But it was bought out. It was bought out by Boohoo. It wasn't originally owned by Boohoo, but it was bought by Boohoo. So you're sort of like, Because the fact that it's been bought out by Boohoo doesn't necessarily mean that it's operating in the same way that Boohoo is operating. So the prices, I would say, are still pretty high. And I have felt that, quite a few of the items that I've had, I quite like the quality. I quite like some of the material. I felt like it was stretchy. I feel like the black sweater is actually really warm, much warmer than I thought it was going to be. I did not think that was going to keep in the heat, and it really, really has. And so that's another example of something that's not really very black and white. And I really feel that it's so important that we don't judge each other. I mean, again, using me as an example, without, if I don't go there, I'm not sure where I go. I mean, there are so many shops that I feel are off my list right now. H&M, Zara is now, more recently off the list since I realised. I know that ASOS is considered fast fashion, so I try not to go there. Primark, I didn't usually shop in Primark anyway. There were so many different stores. Now, it's like the list is getting bigger and bigger. If we keep adding to this list, I really don't know what's left. So yeah, Karen Millen is definitely somewhere I still shop from. But this is why I think it's important for us not to judge each other. So we've spoken about the lower end of the equation, which is fast fashion, and I'd also like to mention at this point the other end of the equation, which for me I feel is designer fashion. I really like designer brands. I do really like designer fashion. But I think the reality is that for most people, it's not going to be what is going to make up the majority of your wardrobe. Even if you're into luxury fashion, you might buy one or two things, maybe you'll buy a few accessories, maybe you save up for a handbag. But the probability is that it's not necessarily going to be what's going to make up the majority of your wardrobe. So where do we go for the majority of our wardrobe? Where do we go for our actual clothing, and for most of our clothing? And yeah, this is definitely a question that I think remains to be answered to a certain extent. So what's the solution? Well, I first and foremost, I try to focus on buying clothing and buying pieces that I know I will keep and value. That is where, that is my focus when I buy something. I try to buy intentionally, and I try to buy clothing that I know isn't just going to be discarded. If I buy intentionally, I know that I know that I'm less likely, that those pieces are less likely to be discarded and to end up in landfill. I also know that way I'm not sort of adding to that level of waste if I'm buying to keep. I personally buy from quite a lot of alternative brands, and obviously this really majorly depends on your style because you might not be into that, but I do buy from a lot of alternative brands. I definitely remember that when I was younger, there were a lot of alternative brands that really did not turn over, you know, their stock did not change that much. I mean, I knew some alternative brands, some alternative stores, and honestly, year to year, I swear, most of their stock, a lot of the stock remained the same. That's not necessarily true for all of them, but I would say that also, when I was younger, I do remember there being this mentality, and I think I have spoken about this before, I do remember there being this mentality around people who saw themselves as alternative when I was a teenager. There was this mentality that it was a good thing to actually have something that you really loved, and it was actually considered a good thing to have something that was worn. If you had something that was new, it was considered a bit, but if you had something that was worn, it was considered that you had really loved that thing and that it was a really important, prominent item in your wardrobe. And I honestly think this is a great mentality. Like, I really think that we need to switch to this mentality because, what a brilliant mentality to have, to actually see wear as a positive thing because you know that you have loved it. Alternative clothing also does tend to be that little bit more expensive than a lot of the fast fashion brands. And I remember when I was younger, it used to cost me that bit more, and I really had to save up if I wanted to buy alternative pieces. But if you're not into alternative clothing, what do? You can, of course, look up sustainable brands. The only thing I find with that is that I feel like if I only look at brands that see themselves, that have actually created themselves from the beginning as sustainable brands, I feel like there are maybe less options and they're not necessarily going to be my style. And I personally don't want to, what's the word I'm looking for here? I don't sort of want to eradicate all of the brands that I might know of. So I would also hope that, I would look at some of the brands that I know and hope that they are doing more, that they're maybe changing the way they work. And I think that these days there are a lot of brands that are doing that. They are, that brands that we know of are trying to be that bit more sustainable. But researching sustainable brands is definitely an option. And then, of course, we have lower designer, what I would call sort of lower designer, which might be an option depending on your budget. So the overall conclusion, I feel, for me, and tell me what you think in the comments. I'd love to have I'd love to have a really positive conversation about this. But I feel personally that the solution, this isn't necessarily very specific. It doesn't necessarily tell you exactly where you should go, and that remains a little bit difficult and a bit complicated, and it depends on your values and your style. But I would say that the conclusion and the solution kind of remains to buy meaningfully, to buy thoughtfully. Really consider before you buy something whether you really want it, whether you're really going to wear it, or whether you just want it in the moment because you've seen it, but because you've seen it on impulse, because it's on sale. Try to think about how much you actually value that individual item and do your best. So I hope that you liked this video. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation in some way. If you did, then please hit the like button, and again, if you haven't subscribed, then please hit the subscribe button down below, and I will see you hopefully soon in my next video.